Oh, welcome to the End Zone YouTube. Let's move the chains. We're here today with spring football expert and insider Mike Mitchell. Mike, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. Love the work that you have done over the years covering all these leagues. Really appreciate your videos are very informative, quick, and entertaining. So thanks for having me on.
I appreciate that. I try to just make it quick to the point. Try not to add too much opinion in it when I can. Mike, you've been breaking news for people who don't know, breaking news for spring football since XFL 2020. Was that when you kind of started on the scene?
Yeah, well, actually, I
Or,
wrote.
sorry.
I wrote. No, it's all good. It's all good. When I was much younger, probably around your age now. You look like a pretty young guy there, Sean. But I wrote about the original XFL back in 2000. I was at xflboard.com. Shout out to Mark Nelson, Greg Parks, everybody over there. I covered the New York, New Jersey Hitmen. So it was pretty wild being that young and getting press credentials to go to games and all that. So long story short, when the XFL was announced as coming back in 2018, I said, what the hell, let me reach out. And I was, to my surprise, even though I had been a fan of alternative football for a long time throughout the years, big fan of the CFL. I followed the CFL over at Sports Illustrated. And so even though I had been a big fan of alt leagues my whole life, the USFL, the New Jersey Generals, that's what got me into this. My love for the NFL draft is what got me into all these leagues, just studying the draft back when it was 12 rounds in the NFL. And so basically when I saw that the XFL was coming back and that XFL board was still around, kind of like a site that was just like commemorating what took place in that wacky world of the year 2000 with the sky cam and all the craziness with Vince McMahon and all those crazy team names and the nicknames on the jerseys and all that. I said, as a side thing, let me just get back into writing and I'll just do this on the side. And then so as I started writing, I started developing connections with players and agents and executives, and I started digging into every story. And this was, I guess, late 2018. And then this whole craziness with the AAF, which was awesome. It's too bad how that worked out. And then, of course, how things went with XFL in 2020. And then just following the Spring League and the USFL, and then the return of the XFL and now the UFL. Like I said, I've been an advocate for these leagues for the longest time. I'm a huge college football fan, huge NFL fan. Unfortunately, I root for the New York Jets. Maybe one day they'll make the playoffs. But that's kind of the story there. So, yeah. And then, insider is not something I aspired to be, but it's just something that kind of happened. And I still feel somewhat uncomfortable labeling myself that. But it is, I do get inside information. I'm privileged enough or lucky enough to be able to interact with so many great coaches and executives and players and to kind of see the inner working. Sometimes when you get a peek behind the curtain, it's not always the greatest thing, but still, nevertheless, I'm an advocate for these leagues, the existence of them. I think they're tremendous for the football landscape. And it's pretty cool to see that even though we've had a lot of stop and starts and a lot of craziness in between, that since the AAF came onto the scene, we've had consistently every year some level of spring pro football. Even the Spring League for a little stretch there was on Fox doing their thing before that transition to the USFL. So that's kind of a little bit of my background there.
How does spring football connoisseur sound?
I love it. That's a good one. I don't even know if I can spell connoisseur, but it sounds cool.
Yeah,
no,
French.
I can spell it.
I'm not, and I was never a good spelling bee, so
actually, it was second place back in Brooklyn in the spelling bee. But I'm joking about the connoisseur thing. It's like being self-deprecating, but that's an awesome title. Yes, and look, like I said, like when I was very young, I forget the kid's name. I think his mom's been putting his stuff on social media. Kid, he drew up all the UFL logos this year, went to the games, I think in Michigan. I apologize for not remembering the name, but when I saw that, it gave me a flashback because I've been a football fan since I was 6 years old. And so that was me. And when the USFL came on the scene, I'm dating myself here, right? We're talking 4 decades. But when the USFL came on the scene, when I became a huge Doug Flutie, Warren Moon, Toronto Argonauts fan, And so I was always fascinated by these leagues, and I'm a big fan of the underdog. And a lot of these leagues, the odds are heavily against them making it. So I'm always rooting for them to defy the odds. And here we are with the UFL. We'll see what happens.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get into it. And first, before we dive into the real meat, I want to get your honest opinion and reaction on UFL season 1.
Mixed bag. I thought the product was good. The broadcasts were good. I think the football was good. I was kind of wishful thinking on my part, even though I knew it wasn't going to be a reality. I wish the merger had included all 16 teams. So it didn't feel like a full-on XFL and USFL uniting. And, so it was like a fractured version of that. But I get the reality of it. So I understand, from a financial standpoint, and from finances, why it's 8 teams and will continue to be 8 teams, at least for the foreseeable future. The football itself, I enjoyed. I predicted, it's not a big prediction, but I predicted the Stallions would win the whole thing way before the season started. I thought the continuity there helped. And then you have a dispersal draft where you can strengthen your roster even more. You can pick from the bones of all the teams that went away, and get all that talent. I thought the level of play was very good, and I thought the broadcasts were very good, so I enjoyed it. I think year 2 is going to be fascinating. It's very unpredictable with spring pro football, like how many players will come back, how many coaches will come back, will they leave for other opportunities? But if you could continue that continuity, there are teams like the Stallions that have developed identities now. And that if you have been following spring pro football, it's almost like watching, I don't know, Cobra Kai or a TV show. You're like now in season 4, season 5, you're used to a lot of these characters. So Skip Holtz and otherwise. So, and they have identities. So you'd like to see that carry over into 2025. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see. The big thing with them is beyond attracting the mainstream football fan, which is always a challenge for these leagues, is also starting to attract more football talent, more players to consider the UFL. I think that'll open things up because they can't really, obviously they're not in a position financially where they're going to offer higher salaries to attract better talent. But the idea is to get the best possible talent on the field that you can that's not in the NFL. And that's the goal for the UFL. So I think the quality of play can improve. And it was pretty good last year. So overall, I like the product. And I have to let go of the fact that in my fantasy world, there would have been a crazy merger with 16 teams going at it. And we didn't quite get that, but I get why we did it.
I think you bring up a good point about the spring football continuity and it always not being there because the goal is to get guys into the NFL. Part of me wonders if maybe like the UFL, if they were able to have more competitive salaries, maybe not with the NFL, but with the CFL or with practice squads, just getting higher salaries in general and paying the players more, it might entice players to stay year over year. Have you heard anything about salaries for next season or what that could look like?
Sure. I know they're going to stay at the same level. And I've talked to a couple, I can't really go public with it right now, but I've talked to a couple of veteran star players that are considering not returning to the UFL because of salary. One of the things that was lost in the UFL, it's unfortunate because it's one of the things I like from the old XFL back in 2000, was the win bonus structure. Like I really like the idea that, like, for example, the DC Defenders 2 years ago, a lot of their players made close to $100,000. So even though their base salary was $50,000, you had guys like Abram Smith and now Jordan Teamo and a lot of those top quarterbacks, AJ McCarron, were paid in that 6-figure range. So they were able to make even more money. I like that incentive of having at least a win bonus structure. I don't think until they develop strong revenue streams and create profitability, because now basically what they have is a model that is for survival mode. And until they can get to the point where they can make big profits, I don't think the player salaries are going to go up, unfortunately. I do think you should pay quarterbacks more. But the way the UFL sees it is we're the only game in town besides the NFL, with all due respect to the CFL, and that if you want to come play in our league and have an opportunity to get back into the NFL, these are our salaries. We're not budging on that because to Fox's credit, they've been in this space for a while now. And so they worked with the XFL in 2020. They did the Spring League, the USFL. Now they're doing the UFL. They've created a financially responsible model where they're trying to avoid the mistakes that other leagues have made in the past, because the leagues have drowned quickly. They've folded very quickly because of finances. So I don't, as much as I would love to see it, you're not going to compete with the NFL, but you'd like to get those, because there are players on the fence that are not in the NFL or that are on the fringe of the NFL that won't consider the UFL because of salary. And so if you can entice those players, you're not going to have a problem with a lot of undrafted kids who are in their 20s that haven't gotten an opportunity in the NFL, but maybe like the young veterans who have tasted that NFL cash. If you up salaries a bit there, then you might be able to attract more of those players who are dismissive of you because of your base salary. So it's a delicate balance, but I miss the reward system, at least they had in place for teams that won, rewarding teams that win with win bonuses. And then there was a little bit of controversy during the season with the union because the UFL had promised like special weekly bonuses for players, and that didn't come to fruition, like player of the week, that kind of thing. So they had to agree to disagree and move forward. I don't know what's going to happen in 2025 with that, but I like that bonus system, that incentive system for players, driving them to play harder and to win. But that's just me.
And part of me almost wishes that there were a salary cap for each team and the general manager could allocate, then you'd get your quarterback being paid a lot, right? And you would give values to all the players, and it would kind of create a player economy in spring football. And it could be a good indicator of what their level might be. Like, for example, I was watching the CFL the other night, and I follow the CFL, but I don't follow it religiously. And I believe the Saskatchewan Roughriders had an offensive lineman go down, and somebody tweeted out that they just signed him to like a really, really big contract, like it was 6 figures, and he just got injured, and it's not good news. So that tells me, a fan of the CFL who may not follow it a ton, but it gives me enough information to know that, oh, this is a really important injury. And
yeah, that happens in the CFL. That happens a lot. Like those salaries that you're mentioning, Sean, they're part of the storyline during the season. And a lot of general managers are forced to make rough decisions, because if you've got too many star players that are injured on your injured list and you're too close to the cap, then you have to consider trading or getting rid of a player. I know Toronto recently released Sean Oakman. The best I got from that information was, and he landed with the Edmonton Elks. He's been an all-star in Canada, played in the XFL in 2020 with the Los Angeles Wildcats. It's great to see that he's redeemed himself. But Toronto was pretty close against the cap, and they decided, we got Jake Seresna and a few other players here. Let's just let Sean Oakman go, because we can't afford, if we have injuries, and they do have several players on the 6-game injured list, they can't afford to go over the cap. Now, at the end of the year, a lot of these CFL teams that do end up going over the cap end up being fined by the CFL. Sometimes a team will go over the cap at like $50 or $100 and they'll get fined. So it is what it is. But I think in a perfect world, you'd see a salary cap, a salary structure. It would add more juice to storylines and how teams are run and the competitiveness of things. But I think they got to start making profits, like from in order for them. It hasn't. Spring pro football has survived. It's great that this concept has been hanging around since 2019, for better or for worse, all these stops and starts and all that. But I think until they start making money and drawing in investors financially, we're not going to see a world where we've got all this like salary competition and guys are being rewarded. And let's just say Hakeem Butler's being signed by another team because he was offered more money with Memphis or something like that. Unfortunately, those storylines are not. It's base salaries, and it's where we are at the moment. But it would be cool to see a future like that.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot of good points about potential revenue streams and, obviously the league needing to make money. So do you see potential revenue streams on the horizon that look really, really attractive for the UFL?
The TV side of things, I think the league itself is going to get more sponsors because they've developed a nice baseline. And obviously the ratings are up from the XFL and USFL. And so They develop a nice baseline, and they're showing that they're sticking around. So, and I think with Fox and Disney and all that, they can make more money through sponsorships. I know that a lot of publicity was given to the Army deal, which they got $10 million a year from that. They need to show that they're a consistent model and that they're going to be around for them to continue to have sponsors. So I think there's a chance that they could, because they're delivering a nice base floor for an audience, I think there's a chance that they can do well there. They can only go up in terms of attendance. Unfortunately, I wrote about this at Sports Illustrated. Their attendance was down from XFL the year prior, and then obviously from the XFL prior and the AAF and all that. And so it's how much money do you want to put in to get return? So that's like a big part of it. So they're talking about putting boots on the grounds in these markets, and that's a big thing Russ Brandon talked about publicly. So they need to get more fans out to these games if they want more profitability, do well at the gate. In a perfect world, this league would really be taken off if everybody was St. Louis, but that's not the case, right? So I know the league makes money with the Battlehawks. They have a great deal with the Dome there, and if they exceed a certain amount of ticket sales and profits come to them, revenue, it's a good revenue split. It's a nice deal, Dome at America Center. So that's an area where they can do better. So until they kind of like get into that territory, I don't foresee, a lot of this depends on whether or not they want to spend money. So I think sometimes you don't want them to go crazy like Vince McMahon or all these other owners in the past that have spent money hand over fist trying to make it, strike it big. But at some point, you can't just be satisfied with getting on base, hitting a single. At some point, you got to start hitting doubles, triples, and home runs. And that might take a little more of allocating your resources in the correct areas. They really need to do better at the gate, and they need to draw more fans on television. Even though I talked about how they develop a nice base and they've done better ratings, obviously, than the XFL and USFL did, we're going to see in year 2 of the UFL where they can sustain what they've done and perhaps grow upon it. It's a big test coming up in 2025.
Yeah, part of me is a little worried about television in year 2, like if we see a dip after the initial excitement of the league in year 1, because we kind of saw that with the USFL, and ever since the XFL, the spring football television and attendance, for everything has unfortunately gone down. So do you know the status on getting boots on the ground in the cities?
There's been talk of them getting out there early. The question is how much earlier. So right now they've got a seasonal employee structure, and they're doing it with the coaches. All the coaches' contracts expired on June 30th, even the head coaches. So these head coaches that you see showing up at the showcases, that they're being paid appearance fees along with travel expenses are being taken care of. So technically they're not under contract, even though there's kind of like a handshake under the table. Anthony Beck, you'll be back with St. Louis kind of going on. But there's no guarantee that these coaches will be back. So they're saving money in so many different areas, and it's extended now to the coaches. And unfortunately, also medical insurance was cut off for these head coaches. So they got to wait till they're back on the clock in the new year. I've heard that they're going to try to get out there as early as possible. Now, the question is, the big elephant in the room, the big question is, when does the season start? And I think it's like a key for the UFL to as early as possible outline their schedule, outline when the games are going to be starting, because it's not a huge excuse, but it is a legitimate one, because it took a while for the government to approve the merger, and they had to come back to the table a second and third time with new paperwork in order to get that merger approval. They didn't have a lot of time to work with in terms of scheduling, in terms of, we had a lot of Battlehawks games that were up against the St. Louis Cardinals. They did well, but they, in a perfect world, they would avoid that kind of stuff. So I think the earlier they release their schedule, the better it will be. And they need to be a little more strategic with how they plan their games, when their games are on, drawing in families. A lot of times they'll have games on specific holidays, Easter or whatever, or certain things like that. You want to try to avoid those things. Obviously, we're going to see games on Friday night, so we'll see how that does. That could be a tough day to draw people in. Maybe you'd like to book as many Defenders games as possible, since DC's crowd tends to lean more to the younger side with the beer snake and everything else. So There's a as far as like boots on the ground, I would assume, we'll see how it goes. If they are starting the week after the Super Bowl, which hasn't been confirmed yet, that you'd want to get boots on the ground a couple of months before. We're talking December at the latest. If you're starting again in March or late March or April even, or if you're going to do a mid-April kind of thing like the USFL, then you want to get in there January as early as possible. I think the earlier you're promoting, because they have to spend a little bit. If you're not going to spend a lot of money on promotion and marketing, then you're going to need people that are in those cities. If you don't have the players in the cities, so to speak, making appearances here and there, then you're going to have to put boots on the ground and spend some money. I don't know if they'll spend money in infrastructure or headquarters for the teams but they got to get in the markets and promote if they want to make a profit. I mean, that's the big thing right now is the league is in survival mode. Can they get to thriving? We'll find out.
Yeah, they're in a difficult position because to make money, you have to spend money, but there might not be a lot, to start with, or you got to cut corners in some places. I think it's interesting that you brought up. So I had Scooby Wright on the show a couple weeks ago, and he brought up how he loved with the USFL how he was in Birmingham, and whenever he would go eat or go to bars, and I was, people would see him out on the town, and when they met him and talked to him, they said, "Okay, I'm going to buy tickets and go to the games." And he thought there was something to the players being in the cities, and it could be that as a thing of marketing or just comparing. And I used to work for the USFL. I was an intern in USFL year 2, and it felt like year 1 of the USFL, and this is just in Birmingham, and year 2 of the USFL, there was way more marketing and advertising than there was in the UFL. In the UFL season 1, it was almost non-existent. Like it was barely there. Many of my friends who know I do this with spring football and know I love the Stallions and know I love the UFL didn't even know there was a team or know that there was a league. So there just wasn't a general awareness. And I imagine if that was in Birmingham where you had a, three-peat champion, that it also may have not been in other cities as well, other than probably St. Louis because of their being the outlier. But yeah, I mean they've got to invest in something. So you brought up how the UFL might be considering, which we've heard for a while now, going after the Super Bowl. What is your opinion on that? I definitely have my opinion on that. What is yours?
I think that for sure, players and agents that I've spoken to want it to be the week after the Super Bowl. They want to have an earlier jump. Right now, I believe we're at, might be losing track, 14 or 15 players that have signed from UFL teams to the NFL. And last year, now we might have more activity, but the number's kind of low. Last year, the two leagues combined, the XFL had 69 players overall that signed NFL contracts. The USFL had 42, if I'm not mistaken, 111 total between the two leagues. This year, I believe we're at 14 or 15. I know there have been a couple of new latest signings. Nehemiah Shelton back with the Jets. He was with the Jets last year. He's back with them now. So there's a couple of different guys that are signing, and it's good to see. But the number is low at the moment, and I know NFL training camps are starting up. So there's that argument for starting right after the Super Bowl, is to give a window for players to, in May or late April, to latch on to NFL teams earlier. And that's what happened with the XFL last year. That's why I'm not saying one league's better than the other, but why the XFL had 69 players sign NFL contracts versus the USFL having 42 is quite frankly because the USFL season ended later. And it gave teams were already filled up. The NFL teams had already had 90 players. And so it's a testament to the quality of the USFL that 42 players were able to sign on. Several of them made practice squads. Guys got activated for games, etc. But the XFL season ended in May. And so they had a lot more players. As soon as the XFL season ended, there were players that were able to get into tryouts and mini camps. And the XFL publicized those. Not everybody got signed, but it gave them an early jump. So the sooner you're in an NFL camp, the better chance you have. That's why players and agents. So I see the arguments for and against, right? For the longest time, people talked about, because this league doesn't have a Northeastern presence, don't think you have to worry so much about weather. I'm not saying that you can't have bad weather in Birmingham in late February or March or what have you, but football weather is football weather as far as I'm concerned. And then when you look at it from a TV perspective, the more people you have at home, the better it is for you. So when you have spring and summer months for a spring pro football league, like at Birmingham, for example, Protective is a very nice stadium, no question about it. But some of those games, it takes a lot of courage to go out there in that 100-degree weather and be out there for 3-4 straight hours. There's not really a lot of cover from the sun. That's why the trend this year was everybody getting shirtless, right? So, I mean, it's part of it, how hot it is there, right? I'm not saying, I know people don't like to hear excuses and the Stallions should have better attendance. They're such a great run team. I love their brand. I love everything about them. I love Skip Holtz, all the players they have. Zachary Potter's tremendous GM. He does such a great job. He's destined for an NFL GM job one day. But that's one of the things, like these games being played in June and July, the weather is also a factor because once the summer months come, it's very difficult to convince people on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon to come try. These brands are not established enough to where they're the go-to ticket. So you're basically trying to attract casual fans to sample your league and show up. So you got to make it as affordable and as friendly as you possibly can for the customer, however you want to put that. So there's arguments for and against it. I get it. If people want to start it, we're okay with starting. We want to bypass March Madness for ratings. I get it, right? But my preference would be the week after the Super Bowl to start up then. It also gives you a window if you do add teams in the future to extend the season. So hopefully that day comes. But that would be my preference. As long as these leagues exist, I'm happy. I'm an advocate for these leagues existing. So I don't care when they play. I'm such a football fan that I'll watch if it's 3:00 in the morning. Even during the NFL season, I'll watch a Stallions game, which is crazy. Maybe not during an NFL game. I don't know. That'd be a tough one for me. But that's the thing. I believe the optimum would be right after the Super Bowl, the week after the Super Bowl. That would be my play.
I think that's a great point. And also, if you think of the positioning that Fox is in, I believe they're broadcasting the Super Bowl because, Tom Brady will be in New Orleans doing that. So, one, strategically, if it's this year, you're in position to put a bunch of commercials and say week after the Super Bowl. And you're Fox. You can put those commercials up, just even one or two, or even just one mention during the Super Bowl broadcast would probably net hundreds of thousands of fans.
It helps because when when Fox has had Super Bowls, they've tried to promote the USFL. And year two, I remember that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, year two, they did that specifically. Problem was out of sight, out of mind. The USFL season wasn't starting for another 2 months or so, right? So it was like, okay. So if you're saying we're 6 days away, we're a week away, all that, you still have it fresh in people's minds. Oh, wow, the UFL's next week, rather than, promoting the UFL and we'll see in 2 months. Make sure you show up. It's not ideal, like in terms of a bridge. So, and yes, like you mentioned, Sean, having the Super Bowl help both the leagues, because they're all partners in this. They all have financial stakes. They're all rights holders in this. So Disney, Fox, they need to do a little better job of promoting the league so people are more aware. One of the biggest problems with these leagues is the lack of awareness. In our bubble, we know all about these players. We know all about these teams. We're invested. But the key for these leagues is to try to get as many people who are football and mainstream football and mainstream college fans and the mainstream media to follow these leagues, to sample these leagues, to give them a shot. The leagues won't grow until they get to that point.
Yeah, and I, by the way, agree with you on doing it right after the Super Bowl for reasons of heat. And if you add Northeastern teams, find domes, right? It might cost a little bit more money, but it is what it is, right? Or maybe soccer stadiums or something like that. Then just the timing of getting players signed, I think is so critical for the league. And you think of I was here when the Birmingham Iron and the AAF were in town, and tons of more fans went to the Iron games. Maybe not than the opener of the Stallions when the Stallions first opened up against the Generals, but It was more suitable weather for sure, and I can
No question.
guarantee that Houston, Texas is probably unbearable at this time of the year, or during the year, sorry, that the USFL or the UFL played. Like I can't imagine Memphis and then games in Texas in the summer. And also those are travel months. People who live in these southern states want to go to the beach or go to the lake. They don't want to stay in their cities because it's so brutally hot. So I 100% agree, and I hope that the UFL makes that decision. I mean, it just seems like the positives outweigh. And then also something that you mentioned, when you expand, you're eventually going to have to expand the schedule. And then when you expand the schedule, guess what? You're expanding the tonnage of the league for television opportunities. So that's good for everybody, right? So you need to think about it. And maybe early on you're fighting what March Madness is normally the end of the season, but if you expand the season, then March Madness might just be towards like, the beginning of the end of the season, right? So it might not be as big of a deal in the future, which for me is just I really hope that they make that decision.
I'm
To
hopeful too. I'm hopeful too. That's I think is the best way for them to go. We'll see what they end up doing. It's interesting that the NFL is getting closer and closer to extending its season to 18 games. We'll see if that
Yeah.
comes at the expense of the preseason or whatever. So maybe that'll move back the timeline. I don't know, but into March or something. I don't know. But for now, I would go a week after the Super Bowl and then go from there. I think it's the best move. It's the best for the players, the agents. I think it'll be better for attendance. I think it'll be better for ratings. And you mentioned the Birmingham Iron. I know it's 5 years ago, so it's a different world. This is pre-pandemic and everything else, but a lot of those AAF teams, looking back on it, did way better in attendance. Even the Iron, I know they had like a crazy. I mean, this is commonplace in like Alabama. They had a crazy like weather game where they had a very
I was
small
there.
crowd for the Iron, but the rest of the games they had very good attendance. Now, I put out an article there, and it wasn't like a full-on opinion from me, but I think like the AAF teams also did a better job of connecting locally, and like having some level of territorial college standouts on their roster. I know the Iron had like Trent Richardson, and they had a specific territorial draft allocation system actually for the AAF teams. So maybe you can see. I mean, we saw the game that drew the most fans this year for the Stallions was, to no one's surprise, was AJ McCarron, coming home, and obviously, Battlehawks fans travel too. I'm not saying no, but that was a big deal for McCarron to be there. And actually, you saw a little bit more elevated coverage from the media, which sometimes you go a whole week with not very much locally about the UFL. So that at least had some traction there. So there are a lot of different things the league can do. It's I'll say this, I'll caution this, right? A lot of the USFL crowds that we heard about, and I'm not saying the Stallions didn't have some good crowds at opening night against the Generals, all that. A lot of those crowds are, what they said on television and everything else weren't actually legitimate. Now, it's okay if you distribute tickets and give away 10,000 free tickets for the home opener or something like that, or 5,000 or 7,000. But, and Scooby mentioned to you in an interview, like you mentioned, that it helped being there locally. And I don't doubt that that's the case. But the USFL attendance wasn't. I know a lot of Michigan. It's as sad it is to say, but Michigan and Memphis this year was ahead of the numbers I saw from last year, which they didn't publicize, which the USFL didn't publicize. So, they did better. And I know that sounds crazy when they only had 6,000 fans or whatever the average was for Memphis games for the showboats. But there was a lot of let's just say misinformation out there. There was a reason why they didn't disclose the numbers publicly. I'll put it that way. And so even in Ohio, and in Canton, which I loved. I love the concept of the USFL being in Canton. They have playoff games with like 3,000 fans. So, I mean, it is what it is. But I think that these leagues can definitely do better with a new calendar and with amping up promotion and marketing, which actually spending some money, allocating resources to do that.
Yeah, and we saw that in the Alliance of American Football as well. They were notorious. I remember that being on Twitter when they would announce the fans, and people would send pictures and be like, "Oh, are you sure about that?"
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough because there's like with sports teams, and you see this. Like I was reaching out when I was doing the attendance every week during the UFL season. I would get it directly from the league and the venues, and then I'd put it out on social media, right? The minute I get it. And then some guys who were in the press room, a lot of my fellow colleagues and all that stuff were like, how'd you get that before me? They just came and gave me that same exact number. They just put it up on the board, all that kind of stuff. But here's like the tricky thing with it. And you see, and I reached out to the Cardinals because when the Battlehawks had games at the same time as the Cardinals, I reached out to the Cardinals PR team to give me the number for the Cardinals game. A lot of times these ticket totals, and you'll see this in wrestling too, the total is distributed. So what they'll do is they'll give you the attendance figure. That's why I say figure. I don't say like the actual attendance at the game. I'll say attendance figure because that's what they're giving me. The attendance figure is basically it's people who are at the game, but also they're counting a little bit tricky. They're counting distributed tickets. So it's tickets that they gave away. So a lot of times if you'll see like a broadcast, Memphis or in the AAF or something, when you saw those numbers, it's not actually paid attendance or people who showed up. It's an accumulation of people who showed up, but also distributed tickets for that individual game. So they might have distributed 17,000 tickets, but you might be looking at only 2,000. How many of those people that are actually at the game is paid attendance, right? At least the Battlehawks, not to say that they didn't distribute some tickets, because you do have sponsors and people that you give tickets to, and then like local communities and all that stuff. But at least the majority of their games, 90+%, is paid attendance. It's actually people putting down money and going to the games. There's some giveaways here and there, but I can't say the same for a lot of the other, unfortunately, UFL teams.
So I have one last question before we answer, or we have the final question, which I sent you earlier. So, what's your pulse on Redbird Capital? I'm sure you've heard how they're getting into NIL and college football, and I've reached out, and apparently they don't really know what, this is off topic of UFL, but they don't know what the college football landscape is going to be, so nobody knows that. But do you think that affects the UFL in any way, like if it's not making money, where they want to allocate their resources?
I don't know. It's a very good question, Sean. Some of my recent articles at Sports Illustrated, I've had people from Redbird reach out to me, just giving me feedback on things I wrote about, attendance, ratings, everything else. So during this whole process, Redbird has teamed up with Danny Garcia, Dwayne Johnson to buy the XFL out of bankruptcy. I've always been skeptical about them. Not skeptical of Redbird Capital Partners' success. It's obvious what they've done. They, dealing with billions of dollars, working with the Yankees, all these tremendous franchises worldwide, globally. So I don't question their business acumen or Jerry Cardinal and all that, but I always question whether or not they were fully bought in and how long they're going to stay with the property. So, and I still have that question, even though I've been reassured and insured and communicated with that they're here for the long haul, all that. But Redbird is used to betting on winners. And so and I'm not trying to be disrespectful of spring pro football, but thus far, the UFL hasn't hit a home run financially. This isn't like broken out in the mainstream and everybody's into it, right? They have a nice niche audience, but that's where they're at right now. Their floor is okay, but where's the ceiling with it? And it makes me wonder sometimes whether Redbird will bow out, because they're used to, like, when you're dealing with the Yankees and the Dallas Cowboys and the NFL and all these other, soccer worldwide, you're used to making a lot of money. And a return, like crazy returns on your investment, and they're not getting a huge return on their investment thus far. I know that the Fox and Redbird has a MLS kind of model in mind, where you'll have them build outward and be like Major League Soccer has become, where you can sell off franchises, and then you can start revenues going up, and you can have others who are taking care of the costs, the expenditures, right? So I wonder about Redbird. They've got so many different divisions, and they've got their fingers in cookie jars in a lot of different places, right? So a lot of branches on that tree. So you wonder sometimes, but whether or not they'll be able to devote themselves and stick with it. Thus far, they're saying that they are going to stick around with it. I think I've always felt this, and I've reported this, and that this merger bought Fox and Redbird and that ownership group 2 more years. And I think after 2025, we're going to have a lot of our answers of where this is headed, who's still in, who's out. and what this is going to look like. So I think year one in the transition of the merger, there was expectation that, there would be some pitfalls and some difficulties and all that, and some challenges, and there were, and they did well on TV. But I think 2025 is going to be crucial to see if they need to, at some point, start rounding the bases and showing that and I don't know if that's going to be an overnight thing with spring pro football. I think even though this concept's been around for the last few years, I think it's going to take time before it becomes a potential smash hit. And I don't know if we're ever getting there, to be honest.
Do you think that there's maybe a finish line in terms of selling at least one or two franchises with the MLS model in mind?
It would be helpful, like it's funny with Fox and with Redbird, they both hired prestigious investment firms to rope in investors. They've had no success with that. So hence the merger. Let's put our sources together. Let's be the one sole destination for spring pro football, and let's see if it works now. That's been the ultimate goal forever. Fox, a few years back, hired an investment firm to try to get capital, try to raise capital. That's Redbird Capital Partners thing, is raising capital. So they haven't been able to do that. Will they be able to sell to a couple different owners, and maybe that will be the start of a trend? Yeah, that would be great. They want to do that for sure. You would think someone would have emerged in Birmingham, but they've been there for a few years now, and unfortunately, it hasn't taken off the way they thought it would. That's been their home there, and it's a tremendous team, and the people who are devoted to the team love the team, and rightfully so, but they haven't taken off the way they thought they would. St. Louis, you would think an owner would emerge. I know there was hopes in Memphis. We'll see about that. But the big thing with owners too, and this is the tricky thing too, is you need them to be reliable, and you need them to, we saw in the AAF, how far certain people's money went and how far people wanted to actually spend money. And before Tom Dundon's the world wanted to, looking at the books and saying, this is enough. I'm not doing this. So, once you make that commitment, once you finally get some team owners, in a perfect world, you'd have all 8 teams with owners, not just 2, right? But you'll take whatever you can get when you're these leagues. So you just got to cross your fingers that the owners do the right thing, that they actually have the finances to carry their end of the load.
It's not just about finding owners. It's about finding the right owners. Because even in the NFL, as we've seen with the franchise over in Washington, and then other poorly run franchises in the NFL, which there are a lot. And then you see that in the CFL too. Some owners really pour their heart into their teams, and some people are questioning some of the ownership groups up in Canada. So we're running up on 40 minutes. So before we leave, one last question, or one last theoretical right here. If you were in the room with Redbird, Fox, Disney, Garcia, and The Rock, what is one piece of advice that you would give, just with your experience, given you've been here since the early reachings of spring football? What would you give, any advice to the league to survive?
That's a very good question. It's hard to pinpoint one thing, but I will say that I think it's time to, if I was just giving them a speech, I would say it's time to swing for the fences. You get what you put in. Let's go for it. If we're going to go, away, we've done the survival part. Let's swing for the fences. And that means putting resources into promotion and marketing, and to be in front and center to get as much awareness about the product. Because if you believe in the product, that it's quality, your job now is to draw people to it and to make people aware of your product. So that would be like an overarching thing that I would say to them. I would also say, and this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but this is what I've always felt about these leagues where they have a real chance, is everything you do, your goal, your mission statement has to be that your goal is to be better than the NFL. And how you present the game, every single flaw that the NFL has, and it has several, your goal should be, we're going to be better than the NFL. How you present the games, and I know they do some of that in the UFL, the transparency with the officiating and the innovation that we've seen in this space, from the AAF to the XFL to the USFL to the UFL now. But I think they're partners. I'm not saying this in an adversarial way, right? The NFL's a monster. I mean, it's the most popular entertainment and sports entity on the planet. I mean, it's unbeatable. right? So I'm not saying you're going to ever beat them, right? You can't match their quality, but your goal, if you're a team, you got to look for the players who the NFL has either ignored or missed. You got to try to find the players who you feel should be in the NFL, should be excelling. That should be your goal on your roster. Like, I'm going to find players that these NFL teams did not, whether it's small school, whatever reasons. So I think that would be a big thing for them. I think you got to try to present the best, and it's part of what Vince McMahon had, right? I know there's a lot of long conversation you got about Vince McMahon, but he really was trying to present a product that he thought in his mind was better than the NFL. Our presentation, we're going to introduce the sky cam, we're going to do all these innovations, we're going to put mics on the sidelines, we're going to take people inside the huddle, we're going to do it. So like the UFL needs that. You're still friendly with the NFL, you're always going to be a partnership, you're not taking them down, but I think that needs to be their goal. Is like, we're going to present the best possible football product that we can. And you know, like, there are a lot of things that the NFL doesn't do right. And then so if the UFL were to do that, on the field and off, try to do things that the NFL doesn't do correctly. Like, take a list of what they don't do correctly and then do that, and what fans are looking for. Because that's how you're going to draw in the people who sample your product. And, you know, we get that some during the season. We hear people like on social media and all that say, wow, the NFL should really have this. It's long overdue. The NFL should have this. And we're going to see the XFL kickoff, whether or not that works off, that experiment works in the NFL or not. But over time, you'll see the NFL continue. We're seeing college football take the headset communication stuff. That's an idea ahead of its time. You have multiple players have access up until the snap to hear their coaches in their headset before a play. I mean, so those would be the two things. Let's swing for the fences. We've proven we can survive. Let's start putting our resources and energy and focus. I mean, just settling for whatever they have, you're not going to see any growth if you do that. So that's my opinion. Swing for the fences. If you strike out, you strike out. It's time to put, you know, chips in the middle of the table. And I think you need to try to present the best possible pro football product that you can on the field, off. And there are some aspects of these leagues that are actually, I know people don't like to hear this, right? And I'm a huge NFL fan. There's some aspects of the league that are better than the NFL. And so you're never going to quite match up the talent. You got to try to, as best as you can, to find the best possible talent that's not in the NFL, right? But I think there are things you can do in the way you interact with fans, in the way you promote, in the way you market, and in the way you present the games on television that's better than a National Football League. And that should be the mission statement. Like, let's be the best possible, instead of we're the junior league, we're the B league, try to be better than them. I know that's crazy. There's nothing better. Like I said, I love the NFL to death. I'll watch a Cardinals-Bengals game at 4 a.m. in the morning. I don't care, right? But that should be those would be the two things I would say if I had an audience with Redbird and Fox. Let's go for it, because if you end up in a year or two from now, end up closing up shop, and you never really swung for the fences and went all in, then why were you here anyway?
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head right there, because what XFL 2020 did so well is, listen, like, we both love the NFL. I watch the NFL religiously. I play fantasy football, but the overarching joke of the NFL is that it's the no fun league. XFL 2020 and Vince McMahon came in, and it was everything from the branding, from the logo to the uniforms to the build of it. Remember, each team had a custom song that came out on YouTube, and it was just
It's fun,
wild, but super fun. The UFL, and also when and this is my biggest criticism, when the XFL rebranded, when they bought XFL 2020, The Rock and Danny Garcia, they changed their logo to this bleak black and white logo. Like, it kind of stripped a lot of the fun that was in spring football. And like, I wish that the UFL had like, you don't, of course you want to be buttoned up, but also what was so fun about these leagues was, I mean, even in the AAF, I remember the opening night of the AAF, Mike Bercovici, the San Diego Fleet quarterback, got hit in the head basically, and his helmet got knocked off. And that sent the AAF viral, because they're like, this could never happen in the NFL. This league is so much fun. And the quality of the play in the AAF was less superior to all these other leagues that have come after it, right? But people still see the AAF as more fun. Like my friends, they're like, the AAF was more fun than the UFL, but the play was like the UFL play is up to here. The AAF was down here. So, like, I think they got to lean into that. Like, they need to lean into the fun and the pageantry and what makes this wacky spring football world very exciting. And I think that's what Vince McMahon did so extremely well. And that's what Oliver Luck did well. It felt like they were all on the same line. Like, and that's what is a good organization, right? Everybody has the same vision. And sometimes with the UFL, I'm like struggling to understand what the vision is. Are you a developmental league or are you the alt league that people want? Like the XFL, they were developmental, don't get me wrong, but they were mainly the fun league for football fans. And I hope that the UFL can figure that out. And that's the marketing mind in me, learning that in college and things like that and how important that is. But I just wanted to reiterate that because you just said what I've kind of kept bottled up this entire off season and season.
If you're an NFL fan and you check out these leagues, and if you're trying, this is no disrespect to what Fox is trying to do with the USFL or what's going on with the UFL right now, but if you're trying to be like a carbon copy of the NFL, you're just trying to be like, like trying to be like them, trying to be specifically like them, then you're going to fall short. People don't know who these players are. It takes a while to get used to these identities and teams and all that. And then if you're just presenting an NFL-like product, I'm not saying that the league should be radical and clownish and start doing crazy stuff like 10-point field goals and you get an extra point for this. And I'm not, fan control football had like a fun little niche doing that stuff, but I'm not saying that the UFL should do that. But you need to try to, instead of being a copy of the NFL, you need to try to present a game that's better than theirs. And they do that to an extent with the officiating and innovations with the rules. And now you're seeing like the first down technologies being stolen. USFL's been doing that for a while now. So, and then we saw that in the UFL. So you hope that the UFL kind of takes that mindset of let's just present the best, because that's how you're going to attract people in. I watch NFL games sometimes and I think, or I watch UFL games sometimes and I think, imagine if this sideline access was available in the NFL. The NFL fans would go nuts if you had you're on the sidelines with Robert Saleh and you're asking the coaches and the players. That stuff is like really, but because a lot of people don't know these players, it doesn't hit as hard, right? Because they're not familiar with them. But if you had that in the NFL, people would go nuts. So maybe that day will come. But I think that's what the UFL needs to do, is try to present the best possible product that everyone's ever seen. Even if you fall short of the NFL, big deal. You can actually be better than them in certain aspects.
Exactly. And I thought like a perfect example of that was the Snooze Fest, technically, if you look at the scoreboard of the championship. But during the championship, because everything was mic'd up, we got Skip Holtz being mad at Adrian Martinez, for not making some throws. And then also you got the drama on the Brahmas sideline. And I felt like if I were the UFL, that would be everywhere on social media, trying to pump that out, promote it and everything. I'm sure that they tried and maybe it just didn't stick, but it because you have the sideline access, how are you going to build that on social media? And I think maybe there's a little sense that the Fox might be a little afraid, given the pizza scandal with Devion Smith in the USFL, where they kind of had that. If you remember that, guys, if y'all don't remember watching USFL year one, they had a docuseries, and basically a player got cut because he ordered pizza to the hotel. It might have been more in depth than that, but that's what it looked like from the outside. And it brought in tons of attention to the USFL in year one, good or bad. It brought in a lot of attention, but there's all stuff. I think they have the tools to make it fun and make it a really good league. Are they willing to invest and use them? I think is what we've come to the conclusion of.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Mike, I really enjoyed having you on. It was a great, productive conversation. Hopefully, maybe UFL people are watching this. I doubt it. I don't know.
They will. No, they will. They will, Sean.
Okay.
Whenever I do these interviews, it's not too long after them that whenever I'm on with Reed at the Markcast, or Mr. Cast, Mark Cast, whenever I'm on these shows, I get feedback almost immediately. They're listening, believe it or not. I know it's hard to believe sometimes. People look at their subscriber count or view count or whatever it is, and they think maybe they're not, but they are. So
Okay.
I've experienced that once. Once whenever this interview airs and people check it out, I'll let you know behind the scenes, Sean. Maybe I'll even show you.
I'll go ahead and say this. Personal story of when I worked for the USFL and when I worked for Fox. And this to me is just a testament to the leadership they have in Daryl Johnston. I remember working on the sideline. I can't remember if it was before or after a game, but Daryl Johnston, president of the league, basically my boss's 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 boss, like super high up. And I'm on the sideline working on the radio, and he's picking up trash on the sideline. Like, he's the president of the league. There were, janitors or people, like other people could have picked up trash on the sideline. Like, and I just noticed that he was always doing the smallest tasks. And like, I have so much respect for him, and I really believe in him. And I know a lot of players who I've talked to who believe in him, and anything he is leading, I'm definitely behind, because, to me, he's just is a leader. So, like, I do have faith that this will work. If it doesn't work with this group, I don't know if spring football would ever work, because
it's gonna be tough to have this kind of backing, this kind of like Fox, Disney, all that, ESPN, and Rock, right? Danny Garcia, everybody. There'll be people who try, but to have this kind of backing and exposure, it's going to be difficult.
Awesome. Well, definitely enjoy the conversation, and we'll have to do this again some other time. Hopefully the Jets are good. Aaron Rodgers is,
we'll see. Hopefully he stays healthy. They have bad luck, the Jets. So
they do.
Maybe they'll, for a change, their star players will stay healthy and they'll be competitive and have a shot at the playoffs. We'll see.
There we go. Fingers crossed. I have no NFL team. I'm just a fan of the league. So
that's easier. That's a lot more fun. That's like me in the UFL. I have no specific team that I root for, so I root for the entire league as a whole. So it makes it easier from that experience. When you're invested in a team, it really hurts when they lose. Anyhow.
Well, there you go. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Hopefully it was revealing about the league and maybe gives you some sense of hope for the future. Thanks for watching the End Zone. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment so we can move the chains.